we're entering a stage now where people are buying Bitcoin. They don't even know they're buying it. I don't even know that the underlying asset that's driving the performance is Bitcoin. That creates a levering within the system itself that is kind of invisible.
You recently had tweeted that there's a few new public companies announcing Bitcoin treasuries every week. Soon it'll be every day. But how do you think about like the public companies as a Bitcoin treasury versus like a strategy type company?
You meet the buyer where they are and you sell them Bitcoin in whatever form or fashion they need to be able to buy. Every product that Saylor's spitting out could be rebuilt and repackaged for every domestic capital market. Wherever there's captured liquidity, what these products are going to have buyers. When I think about what a Bitcoin treasury company is, in my mind, it's the new form of a Bitcoin exchange. Because you're creating a vehicle for people to get exposure to Bitcoin.
What is one thing that you could say, tell the world why Bitcoin matters, not as a currency, but as a revolution? You've predicted that Bitcoin could hit $1 million during Trump's presidency. And that sounds insane for most people. So what would you say that you see about Bitcoin that most people are missing?
Well, you know, the $1 million price tag comes because that if you comp against another asset, it's gold. So, you know, Bitcoin is digital gold. Gold is the comp. And to be at gold Bitcoin parity is $1 million of Bitcoin. I mean, gold's had a nice run. It started, I think, at $650,000 of Bitcoin, but after this gold run, now it's $1 million of Bitcoin. You know, I think Bitcoin's better than gold in every possible metric. I mean, it's more scarce, it's more divisible, it can be transported over the internet, it has, you know, no security cost, it's better in every way. And so it should be like, I think $1 million is the floor value of Bitcoin when you think about it purely from a fundamental perspective. And, you know, adding the element of, I think it can happen in the next 4 years, you know, I could very easily see it not happening in the next 4 years. So I'm not saying that's like the most likely outcome, but, you know, I see a series of factors that have built up that have created like a slow motion avalanche that's happening. And I think that as the year goes on, this is going to pick up speed. And, you know, where it stops, you know, I think there's enough buyers in the market and enough buyers that are watching the market that have deep enough liquidity and size that they could take this thing all the way to $1 million. And, you know, when you start looking at sovereigns buying Bitcoin, which is happening already right now, and you throw in, okay, a couple G20 countries doing it, the price can just run really, really quickly. And so I think it is very much within the possibility that within the next 4 years we see gold Bitcoin parity.
Yeah, I agree. At Bitcoin Mina in December, I gave the closing keynote there, and I broke down where I think it's in 2030, 2040, and 2050, using sort of basically inflation debasement and sort of math on how it takes from gold and other assets. And so certainly there's a easy case, a very conservative case in my opinion, that we get there. And I saw, I'm sure you did, Cathie Wood, ARK put out maybe now 2.5 million in play for 2030. So I don't know if you saw that. It was a couple days ago. But
you know, I'm still the old guard that believes in like the 4-year cycle, and I see the 4-year cycle changing. So I'm not saying that it's an exact 4 years, but like I still believe in the cycles of Bitcoin. You know, you know, I feel like you need the bear markets with the bull markets. There's a relationship between the two, and you don't want to just have like too long of a period where nothing, like kind of, let's say it's like a fire cleaning out like brush from a forest. You want that.
Yeah.
But I definitely see this cycle lasting longer. I think the buyers that are coming in are much more sophisticated. I think that they deploy capital in a different way than how retail deploys it. And I think that like I think if we get to $1 million, there's no reason we can't go well beyond $1 million.
Yeah.
The bigger question to me is kind of like, what's the threshold that we cross where Bitcoin becomes too big to fail, where, you know, a crash of Bitcoin actually would result in a systemic financial issue for the global markets. And at that point in time, then there's only one direction for Bitcoin to go. Like once we become too big to fail, there's only up and to the right. And so I feel like we approach that point, you know, at $1 million, you're talking about Bitcoin being worth basically US GDP. So, you know, at $2 million, you can't just lose a US GDP and the global economy be okay, you know?
Yeah. So that's where you sort of think that level is at $1 million, 21 trillion market cap is sort of that escape velocity, too big to fail sort of moment? or
Yeah,
level?
I mean, I think it could be lower than that. I think it could be lower than that. But at that level or somewhere near that it starts to get damn close. I mean, you're talking. I think like commercial real estate is like 30 trillion. So
Yeah.
$21 trillion market cap is a pretty serious asset.
Yeah, and it also depends on how much Wall Street is allocated to it, maybe how levered up they are against it, because we've seen maybe just recently in the last couple of weeks where sort of some of these hedge funds were sort of leaning on the Trump administration, like, hey, like you got to help us out here, we're getting like unwound, and so maybe it's not even a trillion, maybe it's just some of the BlackRock, et cetera, that are setting up some of these funds, maybe it gets so over levered, but
And even if it's not the funds that get levered, I mean, we're entering a stage now where people are buying Bitcoin, they don't even know they're buying it, which is a very interesting phenomenon. I think it's exciting, and I think it's depressingly like probably how this plays out, because most people just don't care. But people are, if you have a retirement account, and your retirement account is buying, the biggest indexes in the world, let's say it's buying NASDAQ 100. Now you are a shareholder of MicroStrategy without even knowing. And, MicroStrategy is using, your shareholder equity to buy Bitcoin. So you have exposure. And so you're going to get a statement when MicroStrategy 100X's, you're going to get a statement. It's like, oh, wow, my IRA is performing really well. Like my pension fund is booming. And so I'm going to go out, I'm going to spend more money. I might go get a beach house. I might go get a mortgage. I do change my behavior because I'm looking at how well I'm performing. I don't even know that the underlying asset that's driving the performance is Bitcoin.
yeah.
And so that creates a levering within the system itself that is kind of invisible.
Yeah. And we've seen Larry Fink from BlackRock say that they're going to start recommending to like all their advisor networks to start allocating to it. So then all those people that use advisors will be allocating to it as well, and they won't even know it. We're sort of at that point in that game theory competitive landscape where the advisors are going to have to do that if they want to remain competitive.
Oh yeah, and I think they've already rolled it out in their modern portfolio product. I mean yeah, I mean I agree. I feel like the things that need to happen to make this outcome occur have already happened.
Yeah.
Like what now is just like the gravitational momentum of this avalanche building as it goes down the mountain. But like I feel like there's no doubt that it makes it to the bottom of the mountain.
Yeah.
So
Tell me. Let's go back to the 4-year cycle, because that's something that gets talked about quite often. I remember last cycle when Saylor saying all your models were broken, and then of course the cycle came and hit. But I think to the point that you're making with all the institutional adoption, specifically a lot of the ETFs and whatnot, a lot of that Bitcoin goes into deep, dark, cold storage, right? And they're not really cyclical buyers. Is that kind of what you're thinking? I mean, do you think the volatility just dampens down, or maybe the 4-year cycle sort of ends and we start to just kind of ramp right through it?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I don't know. And I think it's definitely interesting that we are in, it's nice when our preconceived notions of Bitcoin are challenged. And so we had a lot of cycles that looked exactly like each other, and you start getting kind of too locked into a certain perspective. And now, like, okay, this cycle is playing out differently, without a doubt.
Yeah.
I think, in terms of just the buyers are different. I think there's two phenomenon that are happening. One is, if you're going to go buy, unless you're Saylor, if you're going to go buy a few $1 billion of Bitcoin or $100 billion of Bitcoin, you're going to implement an acquisition program that takes place over time, and you're going to be basically DCAing effectively at a really big level over a long period of time. And so I think like that makes liquidity flow into the system in a much more slow and intentional way, rather than just like you're YOLOing in. Two, I think like there's a bigger and bigger amount of Bitcoin that is being owned by indexes, mutual funds, general strategies that are market cap weighted, and they're going to be rebalancing their portfolios regularly. And so you're going to have a rebalancing effect as you see outperformance from Bitcoin, both to Bitcoin's benefit and also against Bitcoin as people rotate out. And so I think that rebalancing is going to have a healthy kind of moderating effect in terms of the rate of change.
Yeah.
But in terms of like, does the volatility come down or not? It's interesting. I like I see so many products being created that are these like income based products where effectively like you're shorting volatility, and that like that's where the income is being derived from. And like running a covered call strategy or something like that, and like that in and of itself will dampen volatility until it doesn't, and then it'll amplify volatility. Like
a short squeeze or something.
Yeah, exactly. It's like exactly. You're just like moving the tail, fat tail events like further out into the tail, but they still happen. So I don't know if we're really like reducing volatility over the long term, or if we're just like trading less volatility today for more volatility tomorrow.
Yeah, I would probably say less volatility, right? Because as the asset gets bigger, a $1 trillion asset's much harder to move than 500. Half a trillion and so forth. And so then you mentioned some of these big like allocators who are like rebalancing. So they're selling at the top, rebalancing, which then tampers the upside. But then they're buying through the dip, which then keeps the the bottom from falling out. And so that volatility just starts shrinking probably over time.
No, I agree with that. But what you also have is this phenomenon of Bitcoin securitization and Bitcoin backed companies effectively buying Bitcoin and not selling it.
Right.
And if you look at that category, it's dominated by MicroStrategy. But if you look at that category, it's like 750,000 Bitcoins or something like that are owned by Bitcoin treasury companies. Project that number forward. Like if you increase the number of Bitcoin treasury companies and you increase their time in market and you increase, let's say, their ability to find additional financing or dilution events because the price of Bitcoin is going up, and that's like driving liquidity into these instruments, then they're going to be able to continue to grow at an ever increasing rate the amount of Bitcoin held by those types of vehicles. And so, if 750,000 Bitcoins becomes 3 million Bitcoins or 4 million Bitcoins, like it's going to cause a massive supply shock. And it's like, well, how do you get the Bitcoin out of those companies once it goes in? And so ultimately, like if the sailors of the world can accumulate too much Bitcoin, it doesn't matter if people are rebalancing or not. There's just going to be a massive squeeze on the market. And until those businesses, until sailors want to sell some Bitcoin, like there's no solution for it. I mean, It's absolute scarcity.
Yeah, and typically you think about price elasticity, and there's always enough, whatever asset to go around at the right price. But someone like Sailor, probably at no price he's selling, and so maybe some of that price elasticity doesn't actually work out in some of these hands. I'm curious how you think about it. You recently had tweeted that there's a few new public companies announcing Bitcoin treasuries every week. Soon it'll be every day. 1,000 cash flowing and capital raising public equities listed in every market, including in every index, repackaging in every wrapper, et cetera, every single day. I'm curious how you think about, and I know Bitcoin Magazine Pro now has like a tracker where you're tracking like publicly traded companies that have a Bitcoin treasury. But how you think about like the public companies as a Bitcoin treasury versus like a strategy type company? Because the way I think about it is like, if you're just like putting part of my treasury on Bitcoin, so what? Like Apple's sitting on billions of dollars, like, what do they have that billions of dollars in? Do I really care? Does it really affect what their market cap is? And so if they decide to put some of that into Bitcoin, I mean, it's great for Bitcoin in a sense where it's, buying it up, but does it really affect Apple? So, obviously MicroStrategy is creating financial products out of that. But if Apple does it really? And I guess, so that's what I'm thinking, when it's just a treasury company, or is it like a treasury strategy for the stock?
Yeah. So I think, what Sailor is doing is monetizing volatility. And so you want max volatility. And, I think for somebody like Apple, where they have an underlying business that has a massive enterprise value, that's going to mute the volatility of the stock because the business is going to be disconnected from the performance of the balance sheet. And so, I don't think it would work as well for a company like Apple. But, at the end of the day, in the long-term view of the terminal value of Bitcoin as the reserve asset of the world. One Bitcoin is, 1/21 millionth of
all the world,
of all the value.
Yeah.
So as I think Apple would be very wise to lock down a couple of percentage points of the supply, with their Bitcoin. But I don't think it'll have the same effect as it does for Saylor. Saylor is Saylor's a genius, and I'm really interested in seeing like what instruments he creates next. And Strike and Strife. I was looking up what other STR 4-letter acronyms that he can create. And there's quite a few actually. So I can already predict like a couple that might be coming.
Yeah.
I think what he's doing is really introducing new levers to create volatility and to tap different parts of his cap stack with different types of buyers. And like I think the big picture thing that Saylor has taught me, which is so obvious in retrospect, is like you meet the buyer where they are and you sell them Bitcoin in whatever form or fashion they need to be able to buy.
Boom.
Which is like,
yeah.
That's like sales 101, like sales 101. So he's really pioneered this. And I think this has so many layers to it. He can go so much deeper. And he's really pioneering the way. The way I'm approaching these things is much more 60 IQ. I don't have the strategist mind of Saylor or the brilliance of Saylor. So, I'm just taking the easiest structures to replicate, and I'm spreading them horizontally into other markets rather than doing, basically scaling vertically into other instruments. And so, I think like this, there's just massive expansion of this terrain. Like, Strife and Strike could be recreated for every other international market as well. Like every product that Saylor's spinning out could be rebuilt and repackaged for every domestic capital market, wherever there's captured liquidity. What these products are going to have buyers.
Okay. So that's what I was trying to understand. So when you say, when you talk about all these public companies and announcing Bitcoin treasury programs, it's not the Apples of the world that have a big treasury and they're allocating some to Bitcoin. It's other companies that are actually bringing some Bitcoin products to market, but not maybe in so much in the U.S. markets because maybe a lot of that's already sort of taken. But how do we launch that in Japan or India or Brazil or something like that? Is that kind of maybe more?
Yeah. And I was really combining the two. So, I see both of them as complementary to each other. But yeah, I think they are fundamentally different. I think that there is room, though, in the U.S. for there to be multiple micro strategies. I think even Saylor says, there's 10 companies that are going to be $1 trillion companies. And, there's 100 companies that are going to be $100 billion companies. And there's 1,000 that are going to be 10 billion and, so on and so forth.
Yep.
And, when I think about what a Bitcoin treasury company is, in my mind, it's the new form of a Bitcoin exchange. That's effectively what you're doing is you're creating a vehicle for people to get exposure to Bitcoin. And rather than having to connect your bank account and go through KYC and, blah, 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 fund your account, instead, like you just take your brokerage account and you go buy this instrument and boom, now you have exposure to Bitcoin. And, so like how many Bitcoin exchanges can the United States support?
Right.
More than one.
Yeah.
Every one of these businesses, they have their own network to go to, their own customer base, their own way to market the product. They're like, each of these is going to have their incremental differences. And so I think there's space for many players to compete. And I think competition is really healthy and all of them win together by, any of them succeeding.
Yeah. Well, that's the good thing about wealth. It's not a zero-sum game, right? The more wealth that's created, the more wealth we have. And I guess if you think about sort of like Saylor already creating 3 different products off of it, then you just extrapolate that. There's potentially infinite amount of products that could be created with more creativity.
Correct.
Kind of like that.
Correct. It's like it's a new asset class, and it's like it will balloon in size, and every new innovative product that's created, you're going to have 100 investment bankers figuring out how to clone the product, repackage it, and sell it in a different market.
Yeah.
And so like this is going to be a gold rush of just securitization of new instruments and accessing new markets.
Yeah. One thing I took away when I left the Abu Dhabi event at Bitcoin MENA was like Bitcoin's coming for every area of finance, just completely every area of finance. And I used to be in creative financing. I had my finance lender's license here in California, and we did like invoice factoring and purchase order financing and first trust deed, et cetera. And all of a sudden, my creative financing mind started thinking about all these different financial products, lending products mostly, that Bitcoin can slip into. And I know there's several that are already underway, and some I'm working on as well. And so, I mean, it's really infinite, right? As far as the mind can imagine these things, I guess, yeah, we just have more ideas, more ways.
Dude, we're cannibalizing the capital markets, and we are. I mean, this is how Bitcoin takes over. I mean, this is the thing. Like, this is how it takes over, and it's not that we overnight shut down and cast out the institutions that rule the world today. It's that we force the institutions to engage in this new economy, this new market. And if they don't, then we will, and it'll be forced upon them. And so, it's very interesting to watch. It's very interesting to watch. It's exciting.
Oh, it's super exciting. What a time to be alive. And we're literally alive for history to be made, and as someone who makes a lot of content, and I love to reference history because it's so insightful for us. And there's these big dates, the 1944 Bretton Woods Agreement, 1913 and 1944, Plaza Accord, 1985, 71, Nixon off the gold standard, like these key dates. And I feel like we're like in one of those dates right now. Right?
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, I feel like the ultimate story that's playing out here is like, have you seen this I'm blanking on the guy's name, Luke Groman. I think it's Luke Groman.
Of course, I know Luke. Yeah.
And the Triffin's dilemma. Yeah. Dude, I feel like that's a meme that's just like gaining mind share, and I have yet to hear someone from the, let's say, prevailing geopolitical order explain to me like the solution to that dilemma. And really the end state of it is like, we need the dollar to free float against a neutral asset. Like that's the end state of that. And so that's how we solve this trade deficit issue. That's how we solve for, the industrialization of our economy. That's how we solve for these mega big problems that have to get resolved. And, when we get to that state, then it's like, okay, now Bitcoin is the most widely accepted, most liquid instrument in the world. And it is the neutral asset that every currency will float against. And like, now Bitcoin underpins the entire global financial and monetary system.
Yeah. Which brings up a really good point. David from Bitcoin Magazine hosting the Bitcoin conference coming up in Las Vegas in end of May, middle of May. And
which, by the way, I saw a video you made for it, and it was awesome. Thank you. Cool.
And I'm actually going to be on the main stage on a panel with James Lavish, who's my partner at the Bitcoin Opportunity Fund, and we are going to be having a panel about Triffin's dilemma. Exactly what you brought up.
Sick.
So we'll be doing.
Hey, I'll watch it.
We'll be doing a panel just on that. So, man, if you're not already going to the conference, get your tickets. We'll put a link down below if you want to save some sats and save some money, get a ticket.
Dude, I can tell you 100% with certainty that the Triffin's dilemma and that worldview on basically the burden of carrying dollar reserve status is something that our military industrial complex, our defense complex, is becoming ever more aware of. And like at the end of the day, like the United States military is like the hollowing out of America's industrial base directly affects their ability to fight wars and defend the country. And the institutions, I guess, that in the United States that can actually push for this kind of change to occur are acutely aware of what's going on.
Yeah, for sure. The military understands the implications of all this. I want to take it to the next level here. So sort of in this 50-year cycle thesis that I use, that I use in talks, and I talk about how there's these different stages. So each 50-year cycle throughout the last 300 years, financial revolutions and financial capital sort of follow this predictable pattern. And stage one is sort of like this eruption, and that sort of represents like retail, which was sort of like this explosion of Bitcoin and altcoins. And then phase two goes into what's called the frenzy phase, which is more sovereign institutions and sovereigns. And so we just talked about the institutions, and you're saying thousands of public companies will be coming in with these Bitcoin treasury plays. But I want to jump to the sovereign level. And first, I want to hear your story because from the world looking from the outside in, like, you seem to be the one that went and got Trump and like pulled him into the entire market, got him to speak at the conference, all of that, right around the time he was getting his ear shot off and all those other things. Like, give us a story on that.
Oh man, it's a long and it's a long story.
But how did it even start? Like, where did it even start?
It started in Puerto Rico, late night on like a Saturday night, sitting around shooting the shit with a friend of mine, Tracy, and a couple of our other friends. And it started with like, if we could just get in front of Trump, like we could pitch Trump on Bitcoin and get him to like Bitcoin. We could get him into Bitcoin. And then my friend Tracy is like, well, I know someone who might be able to like get us in front of him. And we're like, no way. And she's like, yeah, like my sister's godfather is Paul Manafort. And Paul Manafort was the campaign chair for Trump in the last election and in the 2016 election. Maybe he can help us. And so that's how it started. And then like it started with, a phone call to get past Paul's like sniff test. And then, it was very clear that the Trump team and Trump orbit, had not dived deeply into this issue. Like they had a surface level understanding, which is very understandable,
Yep.
but like, it's just like they hadn't dived into detail. And so then began like a back and forth of like, these are all the reasons why it won't work, or we can't, why we're not doing it now or whatever. And then us coming back with like an answer to each one of those issues and why it's actually not an issue or et cetera. And so like back and forth, every couple days we're like flipping something new to them. And then eventually it was like, okay, well, so if this could work, what would it look like? And so we assembled like a brain trust of people from the industry. This is an effort that took actually a lot of people were involved in, but we assembled a brain trust, and we kind of tried to like brainstorm ideas of what's like an America first agenda and platform that like Bitcoin is coherent with and like and authentic to. And so like then we went back with like, okay, these are all these different ideas of things that we think like could work with your platform and that the president would like, that Trump would like, and they liked it. And it, actually Bitcoin does fit really well within the America First, political platform. And so, I think Trump, energy independence really resonated with Trump and energy abundance. I think, Trump was the victim of, the politicization of our financial system and banking system. And so, he was a victim of money being seized, bank accounts being shut. And so I think it really resonated with him that's wrong, that there needs to be, people need to have tools to protect themselves from captured financial institutions. I like, as we kind of developed this platform, then like only when it got to like the really well developed the Trump weigh in. And I think like the key point for him was like he came back with the question is like, all right, like this is all great, but I like the dollar. I'm a fan of the US dollar, and every Bitcoiner I know tells me that Bitcoin's going to destroy the dollar. Like what am I missing here? And so our response to that was, the United States building Fort Knox and storing the world's gold in the United States did not undermine the power of the US dollar. If anything, it enshrined the power and value of the US dollar and made the dollar what it is today, the reserve currency of the world. And that if you want the dollar to remain the reserve currency of the world, then we have to have a digital Fort Knox, and we need to store the digital gold. And that's how we keep the dollar relevant for hundreds of years to come. And
good.
Like, then it was like, okay, I'm interested, and let's meet. And so we went up to Trump Tower and made the case in person. And, the president is a brilliant guy. He really is an extraordinary person. And, he has an intuitive sense of opportunity. I mean, he's an entrepreneur, and, he has many people around him that like Bitcoin. His kids like Bitcoin. There's lots of libertarians that like Bitcoin that are in some of those circles. And so, he saw this as a vehicle where like Bitcoin is like the new Dow Jones of the youngest generation of the young people. And so like to integrate this into his platform was also to integrate and bring along, the youth in his platform. And then as he went out into the market and started talking about Bitcoin, and he had a campaign rally where he talked about like, we want 100% of the Bitcoin made in America.
Yeah.
Like the reaction that he got, he picks up on that reaction. And so when he's talking to a bunch of people and in the course of a day, a lot of them mention, hey, I saw what you said about Bitcoin or crypto, or like my kid told me about what you said, yada, yada. He has an intuitive sense of like picking up on that and like doubling down on it. And so it was a very interesting process of seeing him like this like give and take process of him like taking a step forward and then the market reacting in a positive way. And then him kind of taking another step forward. And yeah, it was really quite the roller coaster. I mean, there's way more detail of things that happened along the way I can go into, but ultimately it culminated with him giving a speech at Nashville. And that speech, was truly a historic speech. And, from when he gave that speech, he left the conference and he walked into the conference and it was very much like nervous of how the crowd would respond to him. He had just done the Libertarian Convention, which was not a nice audience at all. And, there was people booing and stuff. Classic libertarians.
Yeah.
But like he was a little bit, had some anxiety. And then when he got the reaction that he got, he left. He was like, dude, these people love me. I love this thing. I love Bitcoiners. Like, this is like, I'm in on this. And so, it's been in his words, a love fest ever since. And, I think in terms of like what he's delivered as president in his first 100 days, which I think just happened maybe today or this week, he's delivered on almost everything he said he would deliver on. Like there's a few things that are still in flight in process, but everything from, SAB 121, freeing Ross Ulbricht, ending the broker rules that the IRS put in place,
firing Gensler.
Hiring Gary Gensler. He took care of that one before he even got into office. Yeah. Putting in place a Bitcoin-friendly cabinet, completely changing the SEC's attitude, rolling back the litigation against all of the American Bitcoin firms, signing an executive order to establish a strategic Bitcoin reserve.
Right.
I mean, like, dude, like just one of these would have been incredible, and he's delivered. And so, I at this point in time, I feel a deep and immense amount of respect and gratitude for what he's done. And now I feel like regardless of how tariffs work out, good or bad, whatever, I'm ride or die Trump because he's delivered for us. And he delivered for Ross. And I like a lot of people were like, he's not going to deliver for Ross. There's no way he's going to do it once he gets elected. And then every hour that ticked by when he was elected, because he said he'd do it day one, people were like, It's been 3 hours. He hasn't done it. And then first 26 hours, he got it done. So really, it was a lot of work, but it was an incredible thing to be a part of, and it was worth every dollar and every ounce of sweat.
Amazing story. Thanks for telling us that. I love how you talked about, it's what you said earlier, like meeting people where they are. So you sort of understood what was important to Trump, and then you fed him those things along the way and let him sort of discover and take more. And one thing I get asked all the time, and I'm sure you've heard 10,000 times or more, 10 million times, is like, how do we orange pill people? And it's like, well, it's that. You find out where they are, what's the one thing that they're concerned with, and then how do we match that one benefit, and then let them take on more.
100%. I mean, it's not that complicated.
Yeah.
People make it so much more complicated than that. It's like, you don't have to like fit into like an army uniform and put on like an orange suit and go out there and like believe in all the doctrine. It's like, what are the things that matter to you? What are the problems that you have in your life? How does Bitcoin affect those things? Why is it better for you if the Bitcoin vision plays out? That's how you bring people along.
Yeah. I'm curious what you think. I mean, I agree and love all that stuff, but I'm curious because there's plenty of people that have been saying online, on Twitter, on X, oh yeah, sucking up to the central banks to buy your coin. Oh yeah, the government to buy your coin, kind of a thing. And as someone like you who's been in it, since the early days, the early cypherpunk days, I mean, how's your view on that?
So we're not sucking up to anyone. Like we're not begging them for the position that we have. Like we've taken the position that we have through sheer will and entrepreneurship and building Bitcoin into an asset that got so big that they have to reckon with us. You know, so like this is not Bitcoin has not changed 1 ounce. The technology has not changed. One line of code has not changed since before Trump liked Bitcoin to after Trump liked Bitcoin. And, you know, like the inevitability of Bitcoin is such that, you know, eventually every government on the planet is going to have to hold Bitcoin. Every central bank on the planet is going to have to hold Bitcoin. Every financial institution is going to have to support Bitcoin. And if they don't, they're going to go bye-bye. So like that's not us losing and succumbing to the system. That's us eating the system and the system having to become part of our system. So, you know, I understand that it's weird to be used to occupying Wall Street, and now, you know, instead of occupying Wall Street in front of the building, we're occupying, you know, inside, the building. Yeah. But like this is the process of us eating the world, and eventually Bitcoiners are going to become the people and the institutions that have to build the society we want to see. We can't just complain about the society as it is. We actually have to go and create the alternative system, and like that's what we're doing.
Yeah. It was always going to be that way. I mean, how do you take over the world without getting to every highest office there is, right? But I love what you said. It wasn't like, you know, Bitcoin became OFAC compliant or something like that in order for Trump to endorse it. Like he just took it as it was. And I think that's a super key piece there. So let's talk about game theory.
He didn't take it like he didn't just take it because it was like him being charitable. He took it because it was the right move to make because we earned it. Like there's 100 million of us in America, 70 million of us in America that own this asset. It's a multi-trillion-dollar asset. If those things were not true, it wouldn't have happened. So it's like we earned the seat at the table, and then he wants to play ball with us as a peer, you know, as a movement, because of the power that we've been able to build and wield effectively, and he respects that. And so, yeah, I mean, it's nothing was given to Bitcoin. You know, like everything that Bitcoin has, Bitcoin had to earn.
Yeah. So jumping into the game theory piece, because like we saw, you know, El Salvador come along, a sovereign nation come along to Bitcoin a few years ago, but they're not like a really big influential nation, you know, if you will, right? But now we have the leader of the free world, you know, the U.S. dollar, the United States government, et cetera, openly embracing it. And not just that, like Trump publicly declaring that, you know, the U.S. should be a strategic Bitcoin reserve, but a superpower, if you will. And so I'm curious in the talks that you've had how that influence starts to play out in game theory. And I saw, you know, before we started recording, I mentioned that in Abu Dhabi, we were there a few months ago, and you were so busy running around with all the sheiks that I didn't really get to catch up with you, but it's like the capital of capital. So I know you've been in those rooms. Like, what is the game theory like now that the U.S. and Trump have made that declaration?
There's nations all over the world that are either getting active in the market, have already gotten active, like just started to get active, or are in the process of getting active, or are studying and will get active over the course of the year. And so, you know, and like nation state buy-in, you know, capital, it comes in many different shapes and forms. So, you know, it's not just like, hey, we're going to go out onto Coinbase and we're going to hammer spot Bitcoin. You know, after that conference, it was revealed that some of the sovereign wealth funds in Abu Dhabi that, you know, are not, you know, directly the central bank, but they are sovereign money, had bought Bitcoin through the BlackRock ETF. They've bought Bitcoin through different funds, and then those funds have exposure to Bitcoin. You know, a great analogy or example would be like this deal that just happened with Cantor and SoftBank, SoftBank, and Tether that happened last week. Okay, well, SoftBank put in $1 billion. Whose money is that? Where does SoftBank get their money? Oh, SoftBank is backed by Saudi. So that's Saudi money wrapped in a Japanese, you know, corporate that's then deploying it into a U.S. securitized Bitcoin structure. Yeah. So like that's sovereign money. So like the money is flowing, you know, just in the same way that Bitcoin carries career risk for someone pushing it internally at their company. It carries career risk for central bankers. It carries career risk for politicians. It carries career risk for kings. And so, there is a step-by-step process that people go through so that they are being appropriate and respectful in how they go about embracing this technology, and that they're doing it in a way that they have consensus, or at least enough consensus amongst their peers and amongst the other kind of power structures within their government. But without a doubt, it's happening. And I would say, the phases of adoption, like right now, if I had to guess, there's probably 50 nation states globally that are actively mining Bitcoin in 100 megawatt plus size. And, some that have been talked about, many that are not talked about or not public. That's kind of like the, let's say, lowest friction way through the door for a government. Like there's one government that well known that, they're turning on right now 400 megawatts of power to use for Bitcoin mining. And, this is like their first foray. Well, like as these facilities get up and running, their next challenge is going to be what happens with the Bitcoin. What do we do with the Bitcoin that we mined? Like, who's responsible for collecting it? Who's responsible for auditing it? Who's responsible for liquidating it? Are we going to have a custody provider? What custody provider are we going to pick? Are we going to build our own custody provider? Like, these are all like the next step consequences of the initial decision that you have to figure out. And then before you know it, it's like, oh, well, this country's just built out their Bitcoin program. Now they have all their chosen vendors to work with. Now they have their chosen delegates within the government who are responsible for the outcomes. And so like once you have that infrastructure developed, then it's like the next step becomes, hey, you know what? We don't have as much Bitcoin as we wish we had. Let's get the central bank plugged into that thing. Right. And let's start running our own open market operations to get some more of that. And so it's this like step-by-step process. But it's happening, and you already have governments at let's get our teams into the market and start acquiring this stuff.
Yeah, that's great that you lay it out like that. Someone like you have been around a really long time. I've been around not as long as you, but a long time as well. And I've built a lot of businesses, so I tend to be able to think longer. But the one problem I see for most people is they just think so short term. And it's like, why isn't this moving the market up already? I saw the news yesterday, right? But it's like, man, you don't just bring governments and sovereigns in. It takes time, as you laid out very well, like the step-by-step sort of incremental process that it takes to even get in. So is this something that, takes these next 3-4 years? Or it's probably more of just like the continued gradual sort of.
Yeah, no, it's like the corporate adoption. It's the same dynamic playing out. It's like, okay, first there was 1, and then there was 2, and then there was 5, and then there was 10, and then there was 100, and now there's 200, and then in a year there'll be 1,000.
Right.
And so it is a continuous march, and there's definitely going to be a degree of there's definitely nation state competition. And so right now, most on the corporate adoption side, most people can ignore MicroStrategy, but like the first Mag 7 stock that buys Bitcoin, like the other 7 are buying Bitcoin right away. And the first G20 country that buys Bitcoin and is public about it, or is people can identify it
outside of the U.S. But
yeah, outside of the U.S. No, but the U.S. hasn't bought yet. I mean, soon as the U.S. becomes active in the market, the second G20 country is going to be days behind. And so even in the United States, like I can tell you, like there's the people. A strategic Bitcoin reserve and the program for the U.S. to go out and acquire more Bitcoin is a priority to make happen, and there are people who are tasked with making it happen. And they are actively working on this challenge. It takes time to do these things.
Right.
Like it takes time. Like even if you wanted to go full speed, it takes months and months and months. It's not like the same as just like you setting up a Coinbase account, and getting to work. So these things take time, and I anticipate personally that you're going to see the U.S. get active in the market this year, and I think that every other country. I mean, as I travel places, I'm asked 100% of the time, what is America's Bitcoin policy? what is the plan with the strategic Bitcoin reserve? Is America buying Bitcoin? And like every country wants to know that. So, the attention is there, the activity is there, and then, the urgency is what's developing. And the urgency only comes when you feel a sense of competition.
Yeah, man. Zoom out. It's extremely bullish. It's all in play. It's all in process, right? Yeah,
it's crazy, man.
The wheels are in motion, and the one thing I just add to what you're saying is like obviously corporations take a long time to change their mandates and shareholders and all that. The government obviously takes longer, but once those wheels are in motion, they don't just easily stop either.
Correct.
Yeah,
it works both ways.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a good place to wrap it up. Let's just have you leave us with something. Since you've been in Bitcoin, building in Bitcoin for so long, I didn't even get into the media company. That's something I was interested in as I'm in the media as well. But building in the space for a long time, I mean, you've probably convinced a million skeptics about it. You got the U.S. president on board. What is one thing that you could say, tell the world why Bitcoin matters, not as a currency, but as a revolution?
I think fundamentally it is the separation of money and state, and is the removal of the unchecked, unfettered power of nations to compel their people to do things by access and control of the money. Like that is the fundamental premise of this whole thing. And when we separate money and the state, we create a consensual society, and every part of our society has the capacity to grow in a way that it can't when it's being malformed via centralized control. And so, I think the way to unshackle humanity is through unshackling control over the money that rules us.
Love it. Separate money and state, and that's why. All right, David, that's amazing. Anything I want to shout out? Obviously, Bitcoin conference next month, Bitcoin magazine. Anything else?
Yeah, man, just buy some Bitcoin.
Buy Bitcoin. All right.
HODL.
And HODL.
All right, man. Thank you, Mark. Enjoyed being on.